Great. Thank you, Heather. And thank you, worship band. That was great this morning. Good worship this morning. I have a confession to make. I know that it's the Platinum Jubilee coming up. And you got a 4-day weekend. That's exciting, yes. Wow, don't we often get a 4-day weekend holiday? That's absolutely brilliant. Let me just turn my timer on so that I don't preach for too long. Not that it makes a heap of a difference. But anyway, I have a confession to make. You see, I'm not keen on these jubilees. You know why? Because when the Queen became the Queen, that was the year I was born. So when we say, so when someone says, oh, she's been on the throne for 70 years, I think, what? It can't be. So it's quite scary. But the confession is this. On the Silver Jubilee, I was in Ipswich living then, and it came up to Silver Jubilee, and there was a carnival procession in Felixstowe, and I said to the youth group, hey, why don't we put a float in the carnival? You know, it'd be a great thing to do as a Christian group. Let's do it. So we were given this 40-foot lorry, and we put loads of stuff all over it, and we tried to think of a theme, and I came up with something that is so embarrassing to this day. So, I mean, I'm ashamed to tell you, really, but we decided we'd put across Jubilee. I know. Shocking, isn't it? Absolutely shocking. And I grimace every time I think about it. You know, I think, oh, gosh, I could have done better than that. Never mind, I was young. And, of course, God always likes you to try. It's better than doing nothing, isn't it? Yeah? I think that's the case. Okay, let's... Matt's given me the subject of the bride of Christ. We've got the bride of Christ, but he wants me to look at the bride of Christ and how that affects our attitude being the church. Because the bride of Christ is the church. We're part of the church, the global church, the ecclesia, as the Greek puts it. We are the gathered ones. We're the ones brought in, the ones that are meant to be different, the ones where we're in the world but not of the world. And how does that affect us being the bride of Christ? Now, I could have gone anywhere with this. And so I thought, well, I prayed about it and thought, where do I go? And I was taken to the Gospel of John yet again. Maybe no surprise there. To John chapter 13. And we're going to read the first 15 verses. Great, we're on. Are we on, Joel? There we go. That's better. Okay, there we go. Let's read the first 15 verses of John chapter 13. It was just before the Passover feast. Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. The evening meal was served, and the devil had already prompted Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. This is not working too well today. Can you move it on for me? Thanks, Joel. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Jesus replied, you do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you will understand. No, said Peter, you shall never wash my feet. And Jesus answered, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. Then, Lord, Simon Peter replied, not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well. And Jesus answered, a person who has had a bath needs only to wash his feet. His whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you, for he knew who was going to betray him. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I have done for you? He asked them. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Now, this is the day before the crucifixion, okay? So this is the Thursday, and there's 5 chapters that cover Jesus talking and talking and talking to his disciples. Hit the last time they would meet together before his arrest in the evening. And he's talking to them. And in verse 1, this chapter of 13, he says that Jesus showed the full extent of his love. And what did he do? He gave them a metaphor. He gave them a parable. He gave them an illustration, if you like. Not a simile, if I can remember going back to school and doing my English, but I won't go there because I can't remember what a simile is. And he washes the disciples' feet. And John is there, okay, as one of the disciples. In fact, we're told that Peter nudged him, and he's called the disciple who Jesus loved. Because obviously the 12 disciples, there's the 3 that are very specially close to Jesus, Peter, James, and John. And John is watching this act of the washing of the feet. And then he's listening as Jesus goes on to say during the day these things. If you can move it on, Joel, thanks. A new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Then again he said, if you love me, keep my commands. And a bit later on he said, my command is this, love each other as I have loved you. This is my command, love each other. Hammering the message home, Jesus was. And John is listening to this. And he's listening to Jesus drive this point home time and time again in this one day. And it had a huge effect on John. So you can see it in John's letters, in 1 John. You can see in just 5 pages of my Bible, John says virtually the same thing 14 times. Now I want you to think in terms of a pile driver, okay? Now I don't like sort of quoting verse after verse after verse of scripture necessarily when I'm preaching, but sometimes it really helps. And I want you to think of these verses of John as John actually thumping home the message, just like a pile driver is driving in that pile deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper until it can actually be a foundation for a skyscraper. It's never going to move. And this is what John does in 1 John. He's listening to what Jesus said, and now he's writing the same message. And I'm going to race through these. Let me come down and do this. He said, anyone who loves their brother and sister lives in the light, and there is nothing in them to make them stumble. You are not God's child if you do not love your brother and sister. This is the message you heard from the beginning. We should love one another. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. And this is the command, to believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and to love one another as he commanded us. Let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us and his love is made complete in us. We love because he first loved us. Whoever claims to love God yet hates a brother or sister is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. He has given us this command. Anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister. I'm not writing to you a new command, but one we have had from the beginning. I ask that we love one another. Wow. Do you see what I mean? The message that he's driving home like a pile driver. I could have put thump, thump, thump in between each of those verses. It's going home. This is such an important message, and it's what 1 John is all about. The love that we should have for each other as the church, as the bride of Christ. Now, sometimes we have to live with mystery. when we read the Bible, sometimes there are things in the Bible and you weigh them up and you think, well, I'm not quite sure which way to go here. They don't quite fit together. We have to live with that mystery. Sometimes the Bible speaks in metaphors and parables. There's the problem of translation from different language, from Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic. There's the problem of different culture from 2,000 years ago, the era 2,000 years ago. The politics of that situation totally different to today, and the location is different to our location here, where we live. And we have to translate all of that so often, and the more we understand about that culture and the more we understand about the language, the clearer the message becomes to us. Language is so important. I was in Spain with Lynn on a holiday. We're in North Spain, where not many English tourists go and not many people speak English. And we were on this farm in a cottage, and we came out one day and there was a sheep stuck in the gate. His head was stuck through and he got his horn stuck, and he was trying to get his head out of this gate and he couldn't move it. So I tried to help him. And I got hold of his horns and there was no way I could release this sheep. And I thought, well, I feel a bit worried about this sheep. I'm going to go and tell the farmer, who spoke not a word of English. So I got my Spanish dictionary out. And I learnt, Pat, sheep stuck in gate. I got the Spanish and I thought, this is good. So I went to him and I spoke in Spanish, sheep stuck in gate. And he went, and he followed me up to the gate. When we got to the gate, he went into the house and he went marching into the loo. And Lynn was sitting on the loo with the door open. So, I went, no. I said, no. Now, I had said what I thought was sheep stuck in gate. What he heard was the loo is blocked. So I don't know how that happened. I haven't got a clue. You see, translation is very important when it comes to language. Culture is important too. Lynn works for a charity called BCT, Bethany Children's Trust, do a lot of work in Africa. And you have to understand the African culture to be able to work with Africans. Just got about the era. Well, I was speaking to Matt the other day, and we were talking about how people's brains work, and when you have a hymn book, you always go left aligned, and we were talking about words on the screen, and Matt looked blank, and he said, I've never even used a hymn book. Now, there's someone who's 31, right? Never used a hymn book. He's always had it on the screen for all his life. Different era. Politics. I was speaking to a guy in the Langtons when I went for a walk, and he was telling me about going to America, and he said, I was sitting in a bar in America, he said, and this American said to me, I don't understand how the NHS works. How does the NHS work? So he's explaining about the NHS and how we all pay in, and it's free for the point of use for anyone. And all of a sudden there was a shout from the other side of the bar, we'll have no communist talk here, please. And he was absolutely shocked. He was only explaining about the NHS, different culture. You have to understand the different culture. Location. That's another one. My brother emigrated to Australia in 1966 when I was 14. And he went out there and he soon learnt that when you go to a little country chapel near the farm where he worked, that you don't go, when it's 40 degrees and there's no air conditioning, you don't go in your suit and tie because you sit there and sweat. He soon changed to wearing shorts to go to church. It's different location. But when we come to metaphor and parable, when we listen to what Jesus is saying about love and what John is saying about love, there is no mystery. There is no cultural translation needed. It reads across millennia, doesn't it? It reads across the globe, regardless of where you are, regardless of the terrain. You can be in 40 degrees in the Sahara Desert or the top of Mount Everest at minus 40. Doesn't matter, it's the same message. Love one another. The language is clear. Well, it's almost clear. There is a little work to do. We have 4 words for love in Greek and 1 in English. We're talking about agape love here. This is not eros love, not the romantic love, not philia, which is soulmate love. That's where my name comes from. It's agape love. It gives unconditionally. It's a love with faithfulness and commitment, and a love that is an act of the will. You have to choose to love. And it's important because it's not sloppy love. Although agape love will often be deeply, deeply emotional. And love is a verb, of course. Love is action. We say God is love, and God is love. God is love. He's a noun. God is love. But love as a noun does not live in isolation. It always comes out as love as a verb. You have to do something with that love. You have to love. You cannot have love as a noun without it turning into a verb. So let's ask ourselves a question. What is love? What is this agape love? Well, I can't do anything else but turn to the Bible and turn to 1 Corinthians 13, which we know so well, don't we? And it says very clearly, it says, love is patient, love is kind, no envy, no bragging, no pride, it isn't rude, it isn't selfish, it isn't irritable. It forgets mistakes and failings, it doesn't gloat, it takes pleasure in truth. It always protects. It always trusts. It always sees the best in people. It always perseveres. Love never fails anyone. And what does it say at the end of all that lot? The greatest of these is love. And the greatest verb that the church has is love. And the greatest witness we have is love. What did Jesus say? Everyone will know that you are my disciples if you have love. And what does John say? No one has seen God, but if we love one another, God will be visible to all. People will see God in us. But what about the things that maybe are a little less clear? These metaphors, the bride of Christ. The church is the bride of Christ. How do we understand that? And how do we understand this washing of the feet that Jesus did? Let's look at those two. And we'll find that as we go into the culture, as we go into the era, as we go into the language, we'll understand a lot more. And we'll realize why, come on again, that's good. We'll realize why the people at the time understood what Jesus said straight away, whereas we have to do a little bit of work to understand it. Let's start with the washing of the feet. It says in verse 1, having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. Some versions will put, instead of the full extent of his love, he loved them to the end. But I want to use that first one, the full extent of his love. Now, obviously, the full extent of Jesus' love is his sacrifice, his death on the cross, coming from the Father to become a human being and dying on the cross for you and me. That's the full extent of his love. But what he's talking about here is the full extent of his love to his friends, to his disciples, to his mates. We forget about that. These are Jesus' mates. He's been with them for 3 years. They've been closely knit community. These were his mates, and he's saying in human terms, I'm going to show you the full extent of my love. You know, my son's been up in Scotland, in Lake District this week, and gone are the days when you used to have a quick couple of beers as a stag night. He's been up there for the week because he's going to a wedding yesterday, and they've been there since Monday. So Monday they went gorge walking. Tuesday they went up Halvallen. Wednesday they went mountain cycling, and then Thursday they went for swimming in the lake up there. And then, I'm not quite sure what happened on Friday, but they probably all went to the pub. And then Saturday was the wedding. And all these mates together, I think it's 14 blokes, they're all together having a great, wonderful time. And we forget that Jesus was in this community. The same community that were about to fall asleep on him in the evening when he was in desperate fear in Gethsemane. The same disciples who were going to deny him. In fact, they were going to run away in fear and completely leave him on his own. Now, foot washing. The proper etiquette for guests in those days was when they came, they would be walking across dusty streets, so you'd wash their feet. But this was done by a slave. This was a very lowly task. In fact, it's recorded that if you had a Jewish slave, he shouldn't be asked to do it. It was that low. Now, of course, the disciples didn't do anything about all their dusty feet, because you never washed the feet of peers. You had to be really low down. So not even Thaddeus did it, who we don't read anything else about in the Gospels. So here they are with the man they call teacher, master, and Lord. Lord, that word means supreme authority. They're with him. And Jesus mentions it in verse 3. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. What did he do? He took off his outer clothing and wrapped a towel around his waist, and he washed their feet. Knowing he had the status of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, the Lord of all, he stooped low. And the message for us is to go low. The message for us is be prepared to stoop. If you don't lay aside your status, Jesus says, if you look down your nose at anyone, if you feel you're too important for the menial stuff, then Jesus says you're not obeying me. And John says the love of God is not in you. These are tough words. We need to hear them. These are challenging. Jesus said in Matthew, you find these words, those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Unconditional love is servanthood in action. That's what it is. And Paul says in Philippians, Jesus made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant. And servanthood is the church. That's what we're called to, servanthood. But we have to work at it. We have to plan it. Because we might believe it, but unless you actually think about it and think about others, your brothers and sisters, you don't think of actions that you can take. What about the bride of Christ then? How do we fit these two together? Well, the bride of Christ is something that people find quite difficult as a metaphor sometimes. But if you look at what used to happen in Jewish weddings, then so much becomes clear. The average age of the groom would be about 18. The average age of the bride would probably be 13, 14, maybe 15. That was typical. The marriage was more about survival than romance. It was an arranged marriage. Okay, sometimes you would let the couple get to know each other and maybe choose, but an arranged marriage. And the two families would get together, and there would be negotiations, and there would be a dowry. And in Jewish, unlike some countries in Jewish law or Jewish tradition, the groom would pay, or the groom's father would pay a dowry to the bride's father. So the bride was essentially bought. What did Jesus say? Your body is not your own. You've been bought with a price. Instantly, those listening would have understood what he meant. Jesus has paid the dowry for all of us, for the church. Then there would be a signed legal contract, a legal document for engagement or betrothal, and it would be a signed contract you couldn't get out of without divorce, even though these two are not going to get married yet. It was a covenant of love where you promised to be faithful to each other. And so you might have only just met, but you promised to be faithful to each other. And there was this ritual they had where the groom and the bride would drink a cup of wine while a benediction was said over them. And then the groom would leave to prepare the accommodation for his wife in his father's house. And he would return maybe 12 months later to collect his wife. What did Paul say? Whenever you eat the bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death till he come. We're waiting as the bride of Christ for the bridegroom. It's traditional that when the groom left this betrothal occasion, that he would leave with a traditional shout, "I'm going to my father's house, and I'll go and build a house for you." What did Jesus say? "My Father's house has many rooms. I go to prepare a place for you." It all becomes clear. Then the groom would return maybe 12 months later, and probably for effect, they usually came at night with torches burning and torchlight procession. He'd come with all his friends, and he would come because his father had built an extension to the house, or built them a house, or created a room for the couple to live in. And so it was ready so the groom could come and collect his wife. But until that room was finished, the wedding couldn't take place. And what did Jesus say about that day or hour? No one knows, neither the angels nor the Son, but only the Father. Do you see, it's another metaphor that they would understand in that day, waiting for the Father to prepare for the bride, the space for the bride. And the bride would have to prepare for that return. So they would pack a bag and keep it ready, a bit like in the old days when you're 70 like me, you've had a bottom drawer. Remember those? No, you don't. You're all too young. They would keep it all ready, but they didn't quite know when he was going to come. I'm sure they used to play around with a bit about this, but remember the story Jesus told of the parable of the 10 bridesmaids? 5 were ready and 5 were not. Well, that's where it all comes from. And he said, keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour. You see, it all fits with this wedding ceremony. And then the groom would come and collect his bride and take him to his father's house for the celebrations. And then the bride and groom will be led into a room or a tent or somewhere where their marriage could be consummated. And after that, celebrations again. Then they would have the marriage supper. Of course, they've all heard about the marriage supper of the Lamb. The marriage supper. And they would party for 7 days. Well, we're going to party for eternity. So that's great, isn't it? But the church, you see, is the bride waiting for the bridegroom. We're engaged. We're contracted in covenant. His love will never, ever, ever fail. We want to show our love, to show that we are going to comply and be consistent with that covenant of love. And we do that by loving one another. So we are the church, the called out ones. We are the bride of Christ. But we have to love each other as that bride, because we're being commanded to do it. And it shouldn't be difficult. It shouldn't be onerous. What I think we're going to do now, if it's okay, I'm going to ask you to pray for each other, okay? And I'd like you, in a minute, to all get up and wander around the room, to be honest. Get up from your chairs. If you don't want to take part in this, you feel uncomfortable, that's fine. You just keep seated. But I'd like you to pray for each other. You know, I was watching something on television the other day, and they were talking about, I forget which country it was. It was a country in Eastern Europe where they have a ritual or tradition. If you have guests to your house and you have a glass of wine each and you do a toast, you have to clink the glass lower than the glass of your guest. Otherwise, it's rude. That makes sense to me. And what we're doing when we're praying for each other, I'll ask what we're going to do. I'll let you know what we're going to do in a minute. It's a bit of an act of lowering yourself. So I'm not going to ask you to go and pray for someone. I'm going to ask you to ask someone to pray for you. And by asking for prayer, you're making yourself lower than that person who offers that prayer. Do you understand what I mean? A bit like clinking and saying cheers below the glass. So I want you to all to mingle around, and then I just want you to go to somebody. It could be somebody you trust or somebody who you don't even know. Go and ask them to pray for you. You don't have to tell them what to pray for. If you have something specific, then you can do that. Otherwise, just ask them to pray for you, and we'll just see what God does. And don't forget, pray very simply. We're not talking for, great sermons to come out. We just want a very simple prayer. If somebody asks you to pray for them, something very, very simple, and we'll see what God does. Does that make sense? So we'll do that for about 7 or 8 minutes, and then we'll call the band up to close the service. So, okay, so if you can all get up, if you're able, if you want to participate, just get up and try and get out of your seats and wander around the room, and let's spend this time. Ask someone to pray for you, and just receive what you get.